Hello, and welcome to Hardcore Mixing. Last time we talked about blending different guitar tones together to achieve an overall killer sound, so today I want to take that same sort of theory, but apply it to bass with a lot more automation involved. I'll be using the song Lush by Lungless to illustrate how automating blends can make the bass more expressive and exciting to listen to. So let's jump right in. First I'm going to show you the sounds we got, and then later on I'm going to expand upon that and show you how you can move things up, down, and in and out to shape the soundscape of the song. So tone number 1 was a Fender Jazz Bass into a Sans amp. This one was an SVT Classic through an Ampeg 810, mic'd with a D112, just right up close. I think it was like where the dust cap meets the cone. So here's what that sounded like. So it's just like your typical beefy, grungy bass tone. And we pretty much left that untouched and used it as the basis for the whole record. It was all based around that bass tone being there, and then we let the other sounds just kind of play off of that. And then the second tone here was the Fender Jazz into the Sans amp, and then from that into a Rat distortion pedal into the 5153 through an Orange 412, and then mic'd that with an Audix i5. Here's what that sounded like. Just your typical filthy, nasty, aggressive, get the hell out of my house kind of tone. Then I also ran a high-pass filter on that because I didn't want the low end. I mean, it was mangled. You've got the Sans amp, you've got the Rat, and then you've got the blue channel from the 5153. So your low end has no chance of making it out intact, and I didn't want to deal with the phase issues that might have blending in, the other three sounds. So I just said, screw it. I'm not going to give myself the headache. I'm just going to run a high pass. So that's what I did there. And then we took this DI. Now I've already bounced this down, but if you go into the blending tones for Massive Guitars video around the 3-minute mark about how we got the Vicky Vale bass tone, same thing, except this was Fender Jazz, Sans amp, and then run through all the same stuff. And then I bounced it down because I didn't want the amp emulator eating up my CPU. I also wanted the visible cue. I'll move these two closer and I really wanted to make sure that these two tones sounded good together. And then we had a room mic. You can hear in the subs, there's a bunch of rumbling happening, and those were room resonances that ultimately in the mix I realized didn't work. I just went in and ran a high pass, another low pass, because there was a lot of hiss happening, and then I gently compressed it. You can see here. I'm just kissing it with the CLA2A. 2-3 decibels of compression. Nothing huge. Alright, so let's run through those sounds again, one by one. Low and ballsy, just your basic bass tone. A lot crunchier, a lot more mid-range. Again, you can get the approximate settings for that in my Massive Guitars video. And that's the disgusting Rat through the 5153. And room. And then all together we have and I really love that. That was the standard bass tone through the whole album. But like I said, it's fun to use bass to make certain sections drive. I'm going to show you where I shifted dynamics to make a section of the song lift. This is coming into the first chorus. Now you notice there's singing happening, and that draws your attention. One thing I did to really make sure that your ears were going to the melody was I lifted up the dirty tone, which is kind of counterintuitive, but if you listen to the bass soloed, so you'd think pumping up the more driven tone would make the bass sound heavier, but what it really did was it took it from this really dense and murky wall of shit and made it into kind of a more pop-punk, I'm just here for the food kind of party dude tone, which is great for this section of the song because you needed that low end to dissipate for there to be room for the mids and the highs for the melody to pop through. Let's listen to that one more time, soloed and then within context, so you can hear what that lift did. And then in context. So, if you know anything about me, you know that I'm a monster and that I love compression. So here's how hard I was slamming these bass tracks. Now you'll notice that aside from the room mic, I'm not running a compressor on any of the bass tracks. And that was because I wanted that blend of tones to act as one living, breathing organism that could change within itself and keep its sense of identity. And I felt that if I was compressing each one differently, that they would have had different character and they would have been poking all over the place and stepping on each other's toes, which was not what I wanted. So first up, I have the CLA 76. And you can see there it's pushing for like 3 decibels. I don't know. I ran some EQ, and then I ran a high pass. And there are certain places on the record where I would ride the low end of the bass down by automating this EQ up 100%. And then right as the section that I wanted to hit was going to hit, I would drop it back down to 0% so that the low end would be reinstated, and you get the functional effect of there being a bass boom without having to be a cheesy douche and actually insert a bass boom. Disclaimer. This is a great and subtle way to give a section impact without having to overuse a bunch of gimmicky tricks. So remember that. Now this song didn't use this, so it really doesn't need to be here because it's at 0% and I never wrote it up anywhere in the song. After that, another compressor post EQ just to reestablish our dominance over dynamics after peeing all over it with the last compressor. And just to add the poop to the party, I ran a limiter that's routinely slamming it for 2 or 3 decibels of gain reduction. And my favorite tool in the world, which apparently I'm running in 32-bit bridge mode, and I should probably fix that, is Track Spacer. And what this little guy does, I'm going to solo this and show you exactly what Track Spacer does. Now it sounds like the low end's getting all wonky, because what's happening, if you actually read the meters here, it's basically a sidechain dynamic EQ that you can set to what frequencies you want it to target and then key in another track. In this case, I use the bass drum, and I have the low end of the bass drum. Every time that kick hits, the low end of the bass ducks out, and what that accomplishes is effectively sidechain compression on the bass, but only affecting the low end, which is, I love it. And I like to run that around, I don't know, 30%. So by running all of these different effects blended at the same time into the same series of compressors and EQs, you can do some really cool stuff. Like if you look here, I'm using clip gain to completely eradicate certain sections of the SVT classic track, which we used as the foundation on which to build the rest of the bass tone. Now, why would we want to duck out the foundation? Well, context helps. Let's listen to this section that this is happening in, and then I'll show you why I made the decision that I made with ducking it out. So it's pretty obvious whenever the guitars punch in, the low end of the bass punches in too and really fills it out. What I was aiming to do here was to let the grime really cut through in the bass only section. Since it's just bass and drums in these gaps here, I thought it was important here to automate some mids back in, not by using an EQ, because that can wreck your phase and change the mood of the song if you're not careful, but instead use an existing sound that's already part of the song and just let it shine a little more. Now let's listen to the bass by itself during these parts, and you can hear the mids pop through without sounding overtly fake, obvious, or automated. There is a difference, you can hear it, that's the whole point, is to make a different sound, but in my opinion it's not as jarring as writing up an EQ or automating up your favorite distortion plugin. Let's hear that all in context one more time. So this whole time I've been talking about using automation to give entire sections their gusto, but one last little thing I did in this song that in retrospect I thought was really cool was right here. I drove up the drive channel here, and since we're running them all into the same compressor, that sucked some of the low end out while still retaining the low end's dominance of controlling the dynamics of the compressor. And within the song, if you look in the automation lanes, it's pretty much the same balance on both sides of that bar. And it just hits so hard on the way back in, even though it was just as bassy a second ago. And the reason for that is we gave the low end a quick break, 2 beats, maybe a bar, and then we brought it back in all at once, kind of like I was talking about earlier with automating an EQ, but this was automating a different bass blend to give the impression of kind of a bass boom. And that's all I have to say about that. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something today, and if you have a minute, go check out Lungless. They're pretty amazing, and I'm really lucky that I get to work with them. And if you have like 2 minutes, hit subscribe. And if you've got 3 minutes to spare and need an extra set of ears for your tracks, feel free to shoot me an email and ask me whatever questions you've got. I don't mind answering them.
That's how it's done!